to give this a go. And so we're going to see what we can do and make out of this. But I thought it would be a good idea as we're trying out new audio techniques, new video, new lighting, testing it out with TikTok Live to see if anybody gives a shit there.
Sure.
To just kind of go through and talk about the 8 domains as almost like another introduction.
Sure.
All right. So
I like it.
8 domains was a coaching model that I had developed over the last 2 or 3 years of working with clients. And it came out of an experience as a therapist where a lot of my clients, they weren't clinically depressed. They didn't have an anxiety disorder that rose to the level of needing a DSM diagnosis. They didn't have bipolar disorder. But they were just lacking something. And a lot of that was experienced with clients describing kind of this feeling of disconnect from themselves. They just didn't know kind of their direction. They felt adrift. And these were usually younger people, I'd say mid-30s and younger. These are folks who had gone to college, they had gotten the degree, they had taken the entry-level job, they had been working in corporate America or in some kind of company for a few years. Maybe they had found a relationship and that relationship was steady, stable. Maybe they hadn't. Either way, they were coming into therapy because they knew something was off and they couldn't really pinpoint it. They just knew that they didn't like experiencing themselves the way that they were experiencing themselves. And so that caused me to kind of stumble upon, now taking from different well-established therapeutic modalities of DBT and CBT and IFS and some other things, acceptance and commitment therapy and things like that. But taking from those modalities, kind of this eclectic approach that landed with what I now call the 8 domains. And it's this, is when you don't live a life that is designed around your values, you tend to miss out on the opportunity to truly experiencing yourself the way you want to experience yourself. Mm-hmm. And so then as I was working with clients, we would have clients come in and maybe their health was out of whack. They didn't like the way they felt inside their body, and that was causing a lot of anxiety or stress or dissatisfaction, a lack of confidence. Or a lot of clients came in because they were having relationship problems because they had a really hard time expressing emotion. And not that they didn't want to express the emotion or talk about the emotion, but they didn't even know where to start on identifying what the emotions were. Mm-hmm. And then, within the movement of deconstructionism, ex-evangelicals, especially being here in the South in the Bible Belt, but kind of in more of a progressive city of Nashville, Tennessee, a lot of people struggling spiritually with what seemed like the cognitive dissonance between what they were taught in Sunday school growing up versus what they saw in older generations that were still running the church and the decisions and the policies that were being made in the country that seemed to collide with how they were taught Christians were supposed to behave. Sure. And so it just kind of spun out of that. Also had a lot of people, in your mid to late 20s, you kind of fall out of those long-term childhood school-based relationships, friendships. And so Nashville is a large transplant city. And so a lot of people were coming into therapy also lonely and disconnected from communities and isolated. And so then the relationship domain kind of got thrown in there with that. And then, of course, maybe the number one issue that brings people into therapy is their romantic domain of, I've got conflict with my partner. My partner says this about me. I don't know how to navigate conflict. I don't know how to really show up in that domain the way that I want to. And so I found a lot of people just editing themselves down to the version they thought their ideal partner would want them to be. Yeah. And so then a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of just not knowing who people were in relationships. And so that became a big deal. And then again, I'm talking to 20s and 30-year-olds, in that career building phase, and they're just so dissatisfied with the rat race, I guess, or the imbalance, And so part of what came out of this was like getting away from the thought of work-life balance and getting more into the thought of just whole life balance, to where work or your vocational domain is just one of the 8. And if it's not in balance with the other 8, then you're going to feel that. And then from there, I separated financial domain out of the vocational domain, because financial values don't necessarily have to have anything to do with the type of work you do or you engage in. So how you want to experience yourself as someone who earns, spends, saves, gives money. How do you interact with money? And then the last one was recreation. And that one oftentimes feels like I've just thrown it in there to make it an even number, but it's such an important thing when you break down, like, what is recreation? Recreation is the experience we have with ourselves of recreating energy, focus, passion, inspiration, ourselves, as we explore ourselves in the context of the problems, the specific problems that healthy recreation gives us. So those are the 8 domains: the physical, the emotional, mental, the spiritual, inspirational, the relational, romantic, vocational, financial, and recreational domains. And then we start in the coaching model, and with our guests on the podcast, when we pick a domain to kind of hone in on, we say, okay, here's how you begin to define your values. And your values are defined by the answer to the question, how do I want to experience myself in that domain? Mm-hmm. So we've had a lot of people, fit people, jujitsu people on the podcast who come in and they talk about the physical domain. That one is kind of the easiest one to talk about, because it's such a universal experience that we all have. Is like, we're trapped in these flesh and bone bags. And so what do we do with it? And so the question is, how do you want to experience yourself as a physical being? And most of the time, people arrive at very similar values. Now, the values typically run along the same lines as, like, I want freedom from preventable problems, essentially, if that's like an umbrella type of value. I just don't want to be sick if I don't have to be sick. I don't want to be sluggish and tired and hooked to machines if I don't have to be at any point in my life. And so, granted, there are certain things that are genetically inevitable and you can't avoid them, and most of us don't know what those are. And so we're kind of playing the game of, I'm going to stack the cards in my favor as much as possible in the way that I live my life inside my body now. So that includes all of the basic, most fundamental pillars of physical health, of trying to get good sleep, trying to move your body in a meaningful way every day, trying to eat reasonably, clean and healthy foods. And so whenever we talk about the values most people arrive at, I just want to feel good. I don't want my body to be a limiting factor to me enjoying life. And so then we start to talk about investments, and that's where it's like a big, wide variety of investments that people have in the way that they want to experience themselves. We had a guest on the podcast early on named Evan Slaughter, who had lost 100 pounds, was a very successful, influencer in the CrossFit and pickleball realm. And he was just such an interesting guest, because what he said on the podcast was, when he was at his heaviest, most physically unhealthy, that's when he was most mentally healthy. And that struck me, because while the two are connected, they are certainly not, it's not a one-to-one. Like, if you're not physically healthy, you can't be mentally healthy. And if you're not mentally healthy, we know there's plenty of buff, ripped, shredded people who, are super fit and super, healthy by all of the biological markers that you can test in blood work. And they use fitness as an emotional bypass. I think of guys like David Goggins, who I don't know David Goggins on a personal level, but I've read his books. I've listened to a lot of the podcasts he's been on, And while I think there's some value to toughness, to grit, to determination, to challenging yourself, I also think that the man lives in the extremes. And I don't hear him really validating much of an emotional experience. It just seems like he uses physical endeavors and physical feats to kind of bypass any work that he would have to do to really sit with what is a universal human experience. And I think that's a dangerous message that especially young men get from guys like him.
Yeah. And people take it very seriously when it comes from him.
Ooh, they do.
They're very religious about the Goggins and his lifestyle and the things that he says, to the point where you can't even question it. Because if you do, you're like, questioning their
and I'm not questioning
assumptions.
What he has done and what he has accomplished. Obviously, it's documented. He's, the race results are out there.
Yeah.
You can't take that away from him. But in listening and hearing the audiobooks and his podcast of like the severe trauma, the extreme racial abuse that he experienced, the trauma that he experienced, I don't know that any number of miles run in the mountains is going to actually be the healing factor there. And so emotional bypassing is oftentimes just that, is I'm going to immerse myself in these other activities that are healthy, that are inspiring, that are really impressive, but it's almost like that is just replacing the noise of the other shit that I don't want to deal with. And I don't know what kind of work he's done. I'm just basing this off of books and podcasts and internet clips that I've noticed.
I can't imagine listening to a Goggins interview or audiobook as my therapist said, such and such. It's always like, go for a run. I don't want to, but my knees are already destroyed.
Yeah.
Let's just destroy them a little more. It's never a matter. I got this really good mental health advice. It's always like, shut that shit down, go for a run, let the pain cave take over kind of stuff.
Right. And that's interesting because it's all pain that he's controlling. It's pain that he's choosing. Mm. And so again, it's a replacement. It could be. I'm not diagnosing David Goggins or
you don't know
treating him. I don't know him. I don't know him, son. But what I do know is that in my own life, whenever I have not wanted to deal with something, the gym or jiu-jitsu or a run or a weight bench has oftentimes been the thing that I've gone to because it's healthy. It's, it's something that it's self-inflicted pain, which self-inflicted pain is always easier to tolerate than other inflicted pain. So anyways, the physical domain sits there as kind of like the beginning point of what we talk about as far as what type of experience do you want to have with yourself as a physical being. And then we move on to the emotional and the mental domain. And the emotional mental domain is what type of experience do you want to have internally with your thoughts and your feelings. And that oftentimes is one of the ones that we sit in the longest in therapy, because most of my experience with clients and my own experience as someone who has been in therapy for quite some time is my value is I just want to understand and know what is happening. But sometimes it's so loud and it's so jumbled up and it's so confusing at times that I don't know what's happening. And so my value, and a lot of my clients have shared this value, is like I value having a deep sense of self-awareness of what is happening within my thoughts and how those thoughts are driving the emotional experience I'm having. Because while my behaviors tend to create most of the negative consequences and experiences that I have in life, my behaviors are a direct result of the thoughts and the emotions that I decided to invest in. So anyhow, that emotional mental domain is such an important thing to sit in and to be able to kind of explore. And I don't think that the exploration of that domain is ever complete by any stretch. Yeah. So again, going back to like my behaviors might be the thing that caused me the most negative consequences and displeasure with my experience. My behaviors are simply just a product of the thoughts that I agreed with and the energy that my emotions from those thoughts gave me. So if I have a conflict with my wife, or my kids not behaving the way I want them to behave, and I immediately default to what's called a negative sentiment override about that person or about that situation, and I arrive at all of these disastrous thoughts of this person doesn't love me, this person doesn't respect me, they never listen to me, they're out to get me, then that is going to generate emotional energy of defensiveness and aggression and animosity. And then it's really difficult to act within kindness or act within patience or tolerance if those are the thoughts and then the emotions from those thoughts that I'm dealt. And so being able to sit in the emotional mental domain and to really challenge my thinking from the get-go, and to not just assume that because I thought it, it must be valid, it must be true. That takes a high level of, I think, emotional intelligence, as we refer to it, as I can disagree with my first thoughts. I can challenge my own thinking against everything that is true. And I say this all the time. Well, I don't anymore because I don't really see clients, and the clients that I have kept have already heard it 1,000 times. But mental health, in order for me to be mentally healthy, I have to agree with everything that is true. And just because I thought a thought that really felt so powerful and strong within me, that doesn't make it true. Even if I want it to be true, if it's not true, I can't agree with it. I cannot go through life in a mentally healthy way if I'm not tethering myself to what is true. And oftentimes, the truth that I need is outside of myself. It's gained in asking other people their perspectives. It's gained in testing out the theory that I've made up. So one of the things that I've gotten better at over the years is I will ask my wife if the story I've made up about her is true. Like if we're in a conflict and I feel attacked, if I feel criticized, if I feel disrespected, I'll tell her, I'll say, hey, the story I'm making up in my head right now is that you don't respect me and that you think that I'm not smart enough to figure this out. And she'll be
say
like,
that point blank?
Yeah, she's like, what are you talking about? Now I need to do it more often and sooner in that cycle. But like, oftentimes the truth about what someone thinks about me or how someone feels about me is not what I have made up in my head. And so I need to outsource that truth finding and to just check the source.
Sure.
Ask the person. So anyways, that's the emotional mental domain. And then the spiritual inspirational domain, I lumped in inspirational because spiritual is just sometimes it's very difficult for people to approach, especially if they don't come from a religious background. And then you say the word spiritual and they think like crystals and incense and astrology and things like that. And I'm not discrediting any of that. Whatever works for you, whatever floats your boat, whatever causes you to have a better experience within yourself on a spiritual or inspirational basis, have at it. But for me, having been raised a General Baptist and then Southern Baptist in my career as a minister, and then coming out and away from the church, I guess ex-evangelical, spiritual just didn't work for me anymore, but inspiration does. And so when we talk about inspiration or spiritual, the question is, how do you want to experience yourself interacting with the divine, if that's your thing, or just that which is unexplainable and beyond yourself? So I can't explain the origins of the universe. Science claims it can, and I'm sure some people think that it does. I'm in no way trying to like advocate or speak that there is like one universal truth about God or the universe, but what I value in the spiritual and inspirational domain is being able to have a connection a mental connection, an emotional connection, and then at times even a physical connection with things that are beyond me. And it's the way that I've described it in sessions with clients before is like, I want to be able to stay connected to awe and to wonder, to where wonder is when I'm trying to figure it out. I'm like so amazed, so impressed. I'm struck by something, and I go on this pursuit of like trying to understand it. And that's what theology is. That's what philosophy is. It's like the pursuit of trying to really understand something by breaking it down into its smaller parts and then trying to put it all back together in this mosaic way to where I can kind of see the big picture. But awe is different. I also like to look up at the sky and just be amazed. Or I like to go into the mountains and look at the massive formations of these rocks and not try to understand how the tectonic plates shifted millions of years ago that pushed up. I don't try to do any of that. I just say, wow. And that's good enough for me in the spiritual and inspirational domain. And then I've sat with in sessions with clients who are, still fundamental evangelical Christians, and they take a completely different route. And the beauty of this 8 domains model is that no one's values are right or wrong. They just are what they are for that person. And so we don't have to share values. We don't have to share the way we invest. Even if we share the same values, we don't have to invest in them the same way either. And so it really allows for an individualized approach to coaching a person towards becoming in alignment with themselves. And then the relational domain, again, I said earlier, like I worked with a lot of young adults who had moved to Nashville. They moved away from their hometowns. And so now all of their kind of childhood and teenage and college age relationships, which were quite frankly easy to form because of proximity. Proximity is the number one indicator of whether or not you're going to become friends with somebody. And so when you're in school, you're in proximity with people, you're doing the same things, and it's easy to make those relationships. And then all of a sudden, when you graduate college, you move away, maybe you to a new city where you don't know anybody, you get into a job, and you might have proximity with people who are 20 years older than you, and you don't really share the same life experiences at the same life stage as people, and it's really difficult to make friends. And so, yeah, I mean, how do you want to experience yourself as someone who relates to others? And that becomes a big, broad exploration and discussion that we have over weeks sometimes. And then how do you want to invest in that? So, my values in the way that I want to experience myself with my kids is maybe different than the way I want to experience myself with my employees or the people that I work with, all the way down to kind of how I want to experience myself with the person I pick up my coffee from at Starbucks. Like, there's some universal, like I want to experience myself relationally as kind. And I feel like I owe a greater level of kindness to my kids than I do the person who gives me my coffee. So the investments might vary a little bit. But that's a fun discussion that we have for, several weeks. What's next? Romantic. Ooh, this one is a fun one. So if you guys are on TikTok Live, I'm about to talk about the romantic domain, so you might want to stick around. The romantic domain is a tricky one because a lot of times whenever I'm working with married people, the question is more difficult because you're like locked in, right? You've already sold yourself as someone.
Oh God.
Say what?
If you've lied up and like been someone you thought they wanted you to be instead of your actual self.
Well, I'll tell you, in some ways, I got married in 2018. And in some ways, for the first 4 years, I was not who I am. Like, I was editing. I was scaling it back. I wasn't really sharing all of my thoughts, opinions, and I wasn't doing the things that I really enjoy doing. Like, I was afraid to, like, go out and do things on my own. I was just very much in codependency and people-pleasing. And the tricky part about that is that I'm constantly guessing. I never asked. I never asked like, hey, would you be upset if I like started doing jujitsu 4 days a week? I just assumed she wouldn't want me to do it. And so I never even did it. And I did that in my first marriage too, to where like, I remember after I'd separated and moved out, and it was like a Thursday night at 6 or 7 p.m. and my buddy Jeff and I are coming out of Deep Wells at Percy Warner Park. We had just done a trail run together on a Thursday in the evening, and Jeff just commented. He was like, like there's no, or no, maybe it was me. I said, there's no way I would have been able to do this. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's no way I would have felt like I had the opportunity or the permission, being married to my ex-wife, to just like leave and go spend 2 hours with a friend trail running on a school night. Like, I don't know if that's true or not.
You didn't check in with the source.
I never checked the source.
Yeah.
I made up a truth in my head about what I thought this person wanted me to be like. And then I did everything that I could at my own expense to try to be a version of someone that I don't even know was being asked to exist. And so for the first 3 or 4 years of my current marriage, that's kind of how I operated. And I would get into these like deep depressions within the relationship, to where I just felt so buried under all of these expectations that I never actually knew if they were real or not.
Sure.
I just made them up. And so about 3 or 4 years in, I started testing them out. I started going to jujitsu, and you know what I noticed? Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. She didn't care.
Yeah.
Did not care. Or like I started, cooking steak for breakfast. Like I went through this phase where I just had a filet mignon for breakfast, like almost every day for weeks, because she doesn't eat meat. She doesn't eat beef at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just assume like she doesn't want me to eat it either. And you know what? She doesn't care. She just wants me to turn the hood fin on so it doesn't smell like cooked beef in the house all day. Mm-hmm. So it's just like silly little things like that we make up these stories about what we think our partners want from us. And so the question, this is the funnest conversation to have with clients about the 8 domains, because it flips the way most of us approach romantic relationships on its head. Mm-hmm. We go into romantic relationships, especially when we're dating, and we take on the assumption, or the question that we're trying to answer is, what do I want to get out of this person? And what do I think this person wants to get out of me? It's very transactional, right? Of like, how can I be the best version of myself that fits in with what I think this person wants me to be, to get out of them the love and the attention and the affection and the affirmation and validation that I hope to get back from them.
Yeah.
Okay. So in coaching people who are dating, I say start with a different question. How do I want to experience myself as a romantic partner? Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. And then show up as much of that as possible in the very beginning. The best dating advice I ever received, and then the best dating advice I ended up ever giving, was be yourself in the very beginning, because you're going to show up eventually. Just like I did. I showed up 3 or 4 years into my marriage miserable because I was just so inhibited and edited down and shrunken in on this version of myself that I thought my wife wanted me to be. And I never really asked the question, how do I want to experience myself? So anyways, turns out whenever I start living that way of kind of stepping into the things that I wanted to be doing, how I wanted to experience myself physically and spiritually, I got freer in talking about how kind of agnostic I was becoming, and freer in some of my political beliefs that I'm not going to share on the internet, but I'm happy to share in my real life interactions with people. But it became this freeing experience for me. And then what it did for my wife was it gave her an option. Mm. And then the beauty of that is that the fuller I showed up as myself, and the more she consistently still chose me, then isn't that beautiful? That she's actually choosing the real version of me and not the curated version of me that I was trying to convince her that I was. And so that's where I guess real intimacy and vulnerability in relationships can exist, is when you just show up as you are. And then if you're dating, let a person not like it. Like, let a person not be compatible with you. Because if you're showing up with all of your interests, with all of your ideas, with all of your likes and dislikes and preferences, and you're just kind of being honest about all of that, and a person doesn't celebrate it, they don't really facilitate you being the fullest version of yourself, if they criticize it, if they shit on it, make fun of it, whatever it is, then that's useful information that is telling you that that person is not compatible with you. You are not compatible with them. And so, yeah, I mean, all of that, if you just show up authentically in the very beginning as I want to have this type of experience with myself in a romantic partner, you speed up whatever's going to be inevitable.
It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Showing up as you are, because you're going to show up anyway.
Eventually.
Eventually.
Maybe it's years down the road. Maybe it's decades down the road.
And it's good to know that no matter what you omit, at least you have found a way to get yourself out of it and show up more authentically, little bit by little bit, until you're finally like, okay, well, I'm me here in this relationship.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, I'm pretty sure, don't have a way of getting out of their omissions, probably because they replaced a lot of what they actually are with lies instead of just omitting bits of themselves. But it's good to know that you can kind of two-step your way back into an authentic relationship that you really like as yourself.
And I've got a friend who, as he began and continued to explore more of his authentic self, separate from evangelicalism, separate from sexual repression and shame and all of these things, and really started to kind of like live within his most authentic thoughts and then behaviors lined up, that marriage did not last.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Like, that is okay. That is okay too. I'm not like a fan of divorce because it's painful and it hurts and it feels like ripping two pieces of paper that have been glued together apart, and no one comes out of it completely
ripples outwards,
unscathed.
and you don't know how it's going to affect people surrounding you. Yeah.
And I've often said, while a lot of people say life is too short, it's also really, really long. Life is too long to spend it trapped in a thing that you just can't enjoy. And so after the romantic domain, we talk about the vocational domain. And I defined vocation as not just what you do for money, but also what you do for meaning. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think there's some interesting shifts happening in the way people view work. I think that there is a movement back. So there's like all these societal cultural pendulums that swing. And so like, I think that in the last 10 years, 15 years, there was this swing toward, do the thing that you love. And if you're not doing the thing that you love as a vocation, then you're going to be sad and miserable. Yeah. Right? And then you had a bunch of sad and miserable people in perfectly fine, stable, well-paying jobs, but because it wasn't their deepest passion, they thought that they were wasting their lives. And I tried to always encourage people to really think about, like, why are you working? Mm-hmm. Right? Yes, it would be great. And I'm living, not always, like up until 5 years ago, I was one of those people. Like, I had a fine, stable job. There was some bullshit to deal with, but what job doesn't have bullshit to deal with in it? Even this job as like the business owner, and there's still bullshit to deal with, but so I guess what I'm saying is, like, I understand that I'm sitting in a position that a lot of people aren't in. But also I haven't always been in this position, so I still feel like I can talk about it. You don't have to love the thing you're doing in order for it to be a worthwhile thing to do. You don't. And as an employer, I am 100% on board with that movement that came about in the last few years called quiet quitting.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't really even quiet quitting. It was just like, I'm going to quietly do the thing you tell me I'm supposed to do for the amount of money you pay me.
Not go above and beyond.
Yeah, I do. I don't ask. Now, I have a couple of people here who take initiative. They really go above and beyond, and they get paid for it. If I find out that they did something extra outside of what I normally pay them for, I always seek to make that right. And my thing is, like, nobody works for free around here. Like this is your job. This is not your volunteer organization. And so that's a big thing for me. But anyways, you don't have to do the thing that lights you up as the thing that makes you money. It's great if you can couple those two things, but it's not essential to a well-rounded, happy, healthy lifestyle. So anyways, we talk about vocation, like how do you want to experience yourself as someone who works? And most of the time what people are looking for are things like autonomy, stability, balance. And then we talk about like what does balance look like, because the vast majority of employers, they will take all of the free effort that you're willing to give them.
Yeah.
They are 100% okay with a practice I've heard it called, and I like the term, is performance punishment. They take their highest performing people, the most efficient, effective, go above and beyond people, and they give them more responsibilities, but not more perks, not more pay, not more time off, not more authority to actually, impact their work. And so as an employee, as someone who works for other people, I think you have to really struggle with like, how do you want to experience yourself and how much of that is under your control? I have worked in places that felt intolerable at times. That the demand was unreasonable given the resources or whatever I was given access to. And those are just places that don't end up keeping people for very long. And so I don't believe in like company loyalty at all. I think if the moment you feel like you are no longer being treated fairly, the moment you feel like you are no longer compensated appropriately, the moment that you feel like you were being taken for granted or mistreated in some way on like a human level, I don't think any company or organization deserves your loyalty at all. It's a contract. Employment is a transaction. Do the thing that I'm asking you to do and I will pay you this amount. And if you agree to do it for that amount, then I can only agree to ask of you the thing that it's a contract. So anyways, so we talk about a lot of times, how do you invest in those values in the vocation? And it really just comes down to like boundaries. Even employees need to teach their employers how they're willing to be treated. So if you're the person who takes a vacation and you take your work phone with you on that vacation, or you take your laptop with you and you open up your email while you're on vacation, you're teaching your employer that it is okay for them to contact you while you're on vacation. Plain and simple. If you are not scheduled to come in and it's your day off and you're called to cover somebody, and you every time you say, yes, I'll go in. And then the one time you really just don't want to, or you've got something else going on and you get called and you don't say no and you don't set that boundary and you go in anyways, guess what? That is your fault. You were the one that agreed to go in. And so I think, I was listening to something on TikTok just today of like, employees have so much more power than they realize. Because I know that everything here at Benjamin Holmes Counseling and everything at Switchback Counseling and eventually everything at 8 Domains and eventually everything at Nashville Brain Training, it depends on the people showing up and doing the work. So I better treat them as well as I can possibly imagine treating an employee, because my life depends on them continuing to agree to do the things that they're doing. So anyways, boundary setting is a really good way to invest in your vocational domain, but really just defining, asking and answering the question, how do I want to experience myself as whatever role you're in, whether you're the employee, the self-employed, or the employer. How do you want to experience yourself? And then pursue that as much as you can. And then financially, how do you want to experience yourself as someone who interacts with money? Money is such a big part of our lives. It divides us, it defines us, it puts us in categories. And it's maybe one of the most powerful tools humanity has ever created. Is money, is the idea of currency, that the more I have, the more opportunities I have, the more life I can experience, the more places I can go, the more things I can see and do. And then the less I have, just the opposite of that. And the less I have, the more a slave to it I am, because I have to get more of it. And so money is just too big of a part of our lives to not include it in the 8 domains. And the question is how do you want to experience yourself as someone who experiences money and interacts with money? And I'll be honest with you, this is, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't have a lot of like education and experience seeing people responsible with money growing up. Like in my home, there was kind of a first in, first out mentality with money. Like there was not savings. There was not, it was just kind of like, oh, we have money. Let's go get some food. Let's go to the movies. Let's go, whatever, go shopping. And so then now that I have a little bit and I'm more comfortable than I've ever been in my life, like I will say it's a weird experience to try and define how it is that I want to be someone who has a little decision-making power with my money. Mm-hmm. And so those are really individualized values as well. And then the way you invest in those values, have consequences. So what type of experience do I want to have with myself 30 years from now? Yeah. As well? Not just now, because if the question to setting your values was only how do I want to experience myself now, well, I'm going to be super hedonistic in every single domain. So my values can't just be about how do I want to experience myself now. My values have to be how do I want to experience myself well into the future at different timestamps out into the future, 10 years from now, 15, 20, 25, 30, Lord willing, 40, 50 years from now. How do I want to experience myself? Because all 8 of these domains are still going to exist. And I've got to invest in the future me as well. And so how do I want to experience myself as someone who experiences money in my retirement, in my old age? One thing that came up is my dad, he's going to see this, and so I'm being careful, but essentially like he had made some plans for retirement, and then those plans got blown up, with life happening, and he just, he's got some life insurance policies, but he didn't have like any like end of life care things set up, and he has his pension and his Social Security and things like that, and he had enough money to live where he was living, but he needed to not live there anymore. There was some abuse going on with some of my step family and things like that. So I moved him to Nashville. I chose to do all of that. I chose to kind of like pressure him to move here so he could be closer to me to take care of him, which his cost of living like skyrocketed. Basically nothing from his apartment almost was like salvageable, or his house in Kentucky. So we started off from scratch. And so whenever I started, and his health started to decline, and whenever I started to see how expensive end of life care was, of like assisted living levels of care in these retirement communities, the first thing I did was I called my financial advisor and I said, I don't care how much it costs me now. I need you to put some policy in place that makes it so that not my kids don't have to spend a dime on me. So if I ever don't have an income or can't take care of myself, whatever it costs me now, put it in place. And so I have that in place now. And that was kind of like a value that I discovered in having to experience some of the consequences of my dad's financial decision making when he was younger. So anyways, these are kind of like big questions that we explore in the 8 domains of how do you want to experience yourself, not just now, but in the future? How do you want your kids to experience you? Because we are going to leave a financial legacy one way or the other. So that's important as well. And then we move into are we on the last one, the recreational?
I think so.
Yeah. The recreational domain. How do you want to experience yourself as someone who recreates? And I really like the structure of that word because it's just recreate. How do you want to recreate yourself? How do you want to recreate your energy? How do you want to recreate your, your personality, sometimes your relationships? How do you want to recreate on every level? And that recreational domain seems like an add-on, but really it's possibly the one that touches and interacts with all of the other 7 the most.
So it's not exactly a rejection of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as, self-actualization at the top. It's just a part of the puzzle in recreation.
Yes. Yeah. So recreation feels like a luxury when you're only thinking of it as playfulness or enjoyment or hobbies. Recreation, the way that I look at it in the 8 domains, has everything to do with the approach we take in keeping ourselves going. Where do you get your energy from? So for me, I want to experience myself as someone who recreates in a way that makes me more of me available to the people in my life. And so recreation, recreating, it just, again, sleep. Get sleep. Because that's recreating physical energy, cognitive abilities. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Not just like, well, maybe take up knitting. You need a hobby. That's part of it, maybe. But also recreating in I think there's also something important in recreation to where we need to choose to engage with problems. Mm-hmm. So whether that is something like, a hobby, knitting or music or writing or something like that, to where you're growing and you're learning and you're challenging yourself, you're expanding who you are through forcing yourself into problem solving. And so anyways, recreation is an interesting one because people usually don't invest much, especially busy people. They're working a lot. They've got kids. They've got families. They've got bills to pay. And they're like, I used to love bowling, or I used to love tennis, or I used to love this, that, or the other. And then, but all of these other things become more important than that. Well, when we're only looking at recreation as our engagement in hobbies, then yeah, it's really easy to say like, I don't have time for that. But if you look at recreation in the way that you eat, the way that you sleep, the way that you interact with people, like, listening to people, taking on perspectives, shutting your mouth and really like letting someone explain their point of view, that can be recreation. Because I am going to recreate my concept of something happening in the world if I listen to someone who's different than me. That can be recreation.
Well, on that note, you did post a TikTok a few days ago, maybe even yesterday, about if anybody has any recommendations for just things to do now that you're sort of off the mat.
Yeah, so the leading suggestions were knitting and crocheting. 80% of my followers are women in their 30s and 40s. So I appreciate it. So what I think is going to end up happening is I go to the surgeon on Monday. The surgeon is going to look at the incision, And if the incision is closed enough and healed, I'm going to start swimming.
Okay.
Because the point to the TikTok about like I need something else to do was that I have lost the ability to go to jiu-jitsu. And it wasn't just about a thing to do. What jiu-jitsu did was it took my phone and it put it in a locker room
Sure.
for over an hour, 4 or 5 times a week. Nothing else in the world had access to me except what was happening at jiu-jitsu. It was mindfulness, it was embodiment practice, it was truly forced disconnect from the world, from my wife, from my kids, and I needed that, and I've discovered that in the absence of that, I am a cranky dude. And so knitting is not going to do it for me because I don't I'm going to be honest with you, internet. I'm not disciplined enough to like say, okay, I'm going to knit for the next hour and not look at my phone. I go to the gym 5 days a week and lift weights. And you know what I do? I do my like 45, 60-second set. I pick up my phone, I log the set, and then I open TikTok. You know, like for a minute or two, I check my watch. I'm like, oh, okay, it's been 90 seconds. I put the phone down and I do another set and I pick it right back up. And so, yes, there's room for me to improve on that. And also, if I can just go swimming, well, I can't have the phone with me. I can't have headphones in. I can't get notifications that I got a text message. I'd just be in the water swimming, and it's like forced unplugging.
Yeah. It's now that I'm sitting here brainstorming and thinking about it, not a lot of hobbies or things in general have that forced disconnect with the phone. So that is a caveat and a requirement. Really narrows things down.
So some of the other ladies that I really appreciated your recommendations were like Pilates was one of them. Like, I'm not afraid to do Pilates. I think Pilates is one of the hardest workouts a person can do. And I can't, my knees, like, I can't do it with my knee right now. Yoga was another one. And I'm like, yeah, there's some yoga poses that I could do, but I can't do like a full, whatever flow 90-minute hot yoga thing that my wife does every weekend. Like I can't do that with my knee right now. So what could I do that is going to force me to put my phone down, not check it? And I'm not just scrolling on TikTok. Like I'm checking my emails, I'm answering text or group me messages from employees, I'm looking at bank statements. I'm just plugged into my life and I need to unplug from it.
Makes sense. It's one of the things I was gonna suggest. Like you want to learn how to play guitar, but
I know how to play guitar.
You do?
Yes.
How well?
Not well.
Okay.
But if you give me a tab sheet like chords,
sure,
and let me hear a song, I can play most songs. But like music theory, lead guitar, like picking out melodies, scales. No, I'm just like all chords.
Sure.
Backup guitar, background guitar. So I was a youth minister.
Right.
So
gotta learn guitar.
Had to learn how to play praise and worship music. Yeah, it really threw me whenever Chris Tomlin started writing Christian music that included E minors and instead of just the G, C, D, A.
Yeah.
And then we threw in like an A minor and then an E minor and then an F in there. And I'm just like, what? Yeah, the bar chords. That took me a while to pick up, but I did for the Lord.
Of course.
All things are possible.
Through him.
Yes.
Indeed.
Praise God.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. What timestamp are we at right now?
We are at 1,717 bars, which we don't have a time. I think we started around 12:30, so it's approaching an hour.
Approaching an hour. Well, that's probably good for today, I think. I think we got through all of the 8 domains, kind of a fleshing it out. We are, I guess, if anybody of the 1 or 2 people watching right now and make announcements, we do have some really cool people lined up in the next 2 or 3 weeks to come. I don't think we have anybody for next week, but possibly Ashley, and I'll get another therapist in here who Ashley's done the last 2 with me. You can go to 8 Domains Podcast on Spotify, on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast, on YouTube. the 8 Domains Pod. Is it 8 Domains Pod or a podcast on Instagram?
Pod.
I think it's 8 Domains Pod on Instagram.
Yeah.
You can kind of see clips of previous episodes there. And then really just engage with the content, ask questions, throw out some ideas. But we're going to try something that we haven't done. Somebody that I admire from TikTok, another therapist who lives in New York City. I just like the way that she says things. She seems very creative and clever in the way that she posts on TikTok. I have invited her to Nashville. She'll be here. We'll be recording that one in about 3 weeks. And so that's pretty exciting. And if that goes well, and it's not a complete flop, we might try to continue to invite people from the internet that seem to have cool things to say. It might be a fun hang to sit down with. So yeah, that's where we're going.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Nice. All right. Well, with that, thank you for tuning in to the 8 Domains podcast. Stay tuned for more.
All right.